And I have no idea what time it is, but I'd say we'll do the slide.
Yeah.
That's okay. If you want to hit OK one more time, it added transitions to the slide, and it's going to pop up Indiana University of Pennsylvania, I think. Yeah, there it is.
Mind if I do a little introduction?
Yeah, go ahead.
Elena, Frye.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Greene County Historical Society. I'm Phil, and I will be hosting again tonight. Thanks for Matt, the director of the Greene County Historical Society, for letting us host a speaker tonight. I belong to the Montauk chapter number 3, an archaeology organization. We have Elena Frye over here who will be doing a nice little presentation for us tonight. We do this about every couple months or so, depending on holidays and weather. And would you like to do your presentation tonight? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the title of my presentation is Geophysical Investigations and Targeted Archaeological Testing at the Basilica of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, also known as the Conewago Chapel, which is located in Adams County, Pennsylvania. So just to start with like a quick little overview of the structure of my presentation, I'll talk a little bit about me and who I am, my background. Then I'll do a quick overview of the project overall, the purpose of it, the location, the goals. I'll talk a little bit about the history of the Basilica, a little bit about the history of the site, as well as about the geophysical methods used, how those methods work, and how they're often used in archaeology. I'll talk about how we targeted survey grids for this project, chose locations to do our work, and then I'll go over the results of the initial geophysical survey, and then go over planned ground truthing and future research at the site. I had hoped to finish excavations before this presentation, which is why targeted excavations is in the title, but unfortunately got pushed back. So hopefully I'll be there later this week. So we're going to focus primarily on the geophysical methods, and we'll talk about where we're going to place those excavations. About me, like we said before, my name is Elena Frye. I am a master's student finishing my degree in applied archaeology at the Indiana University of Pennsylvania. Prior to coming to IUP, most of my experience was in education and nonprofit space, and my undergraduate degree had emphasized cultural anthropology, but I kind of realized I wanted to pivot in 2022, applied to IUP. Since being here, I have worked on a variety of archaeological projects. Some of my favorites have been working as a research assistant on an Untold Stories project with an interdisciplinary team at IUP that was led by the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy. I've done geophysical surveys, including mapping marked and unmarked graves in a cemetery in Indiana County. And this summer, I also helped run a program for undergraduates at IUP. We took students to a field site in Virginia, and we're working in March doing field work in geology and archaeology, run by Dr. Christiani at IUP. I have chosen primarily to focus on archaeological geophysics throughout my degree. It's something that I love very much. I'm also interested in geographic information systems as well as remote sensing more broadly. And so this project, if you don't know what I mean slide, is part of my master's thesis research. I focused on using geophysics to look for the original chapel school building at a site in Adams County. This map just shows the location of the site in Pennsylvania and in Adams County in particular. If you, like me, have a very vague understanding of where the counties are, very close to Gettysburg. So my primary research interest, like I said, is in archaeological geophysics. This project has allowed me to lead a project centered around it, and it's also incorporated the use of GIS, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. So overall, the project had 3 primary research questions. The first one, are there likely structural remains on the current or historical basilica property based on a geophysical survey that includes ground penetrating radar and magnetic radiometer surveys? The second one being, are the interpreted structures from that survey actual architectural features? And the third being, are any of those likely architectural features able to be associated with the original parish school building through ground truthing? This presentation is primarily going to focus on the first research question. The other 2 depend on future excavations. So going into the church history a little bit, these photos, the one on the right is a drawing of the church, and the one on the left is a photo from the church's website of the church as it is today. So the Basilica of the Sacred Heart of Jesus is a minor Roman Catholic basilica in Hanover, Pennsylvania, near Gettysburg. It was originally founded in 1730 under the name by 1780s, they had a congregation of over 1,000 members, and they tore down the original building and in its place, on the same spot, started construction on the present day building. The main section of the current church building was built between 1785 and 1787, with additions in the time since. It's the oldest stone Catholic church building in the United States, and it was one of the largest at the time of its founding. So from the original building, they added on the transept, and the apse were added in 1851. In 1873, the present day steeple was added, so you can see on this drawing. It was not always there. And then in the 1880s, they remodeled the residence that's attached to the church. They added the mansard roof and expanded. It was named a Basilica in 1962. And in the present day, the church is undergoing a restoration of the interior. So, like other contemporary Jesuit properties in the region around Pennsylvania and Maryland, the property at Conewago was largely farmed for a lot of its history. The initial size of the property isn't entirely clear. Different sources say different things, but in the mid-18th century, it was somewhere between 120 and 190 acres. By 1776, it had grown to 750 acres, which seems to be the largest size. Most of the contemporary plantations relied on the labor of enslaved individuals. One thing that made Conewago unique is that it primarily relied on the labor of free men and women and apprentices. However, I do want to note that there are 4 enslaved men documented in the church records. Their names were Johnny, Ben, Jack, and Peter. Johnny and Ben were listed in 1778, while Peter and Jack were documented in 1798 and were able to purchase their freedom by 1801. It's not known whether these 4 men performed agricultural or domestic labor, but no other enslaved individuals are found in church documents. So, unlike other Jesuit plantations, the farming at Conewago primarily relied, like I said, on free laborers. So in the mid-19th century, one of the families noted to be associated with the property was the Will family. They lived in a house that would have been down here a little bit. You can kind of see it. It was known as the Hermitage. One of the things I had hoped to do as part of my thesis was also searching for structural remains of that building, but most of the property that was historically associated with the church no longer is. So while this is a map showing a much larger portion of the property, today it's pretty much this area that's founded. The man that lives here is a farmer who owns much of this property, and some of the original church property, like right here, this was, I believe, some of the first land sold off to infuse some money back into the church. But in the mid-19th century, the Will family was in charge of most of the farming at Conewago, except for a small section that was reserved for the Jesuits working at the church. The Will household in 1850 had Charles and Margaret Will, 7 children, and 7 additional adult laborers. In later years, the land was divided into 3 separate farms before eventually being largely sold off, giving us a much smaller section of the church property today. And just for reference about the map of the church property today, here is the Basilica itself. Back here is the church's cemetery. This space is pretty much empty. I think the cemetery will build a little bit into it, but historically it was just between these 2 paths. And this is actually the modern chapel school building. They had an independent chapel school, but in the past 20 years, with shifting Catholic school, like just as Catholic school populations have shrunk and church schools have combined, they are now part of the St. Teresa of Calcutta school. They joined with a couple other schools in the region in the past 10 years. So the map on the right is Conewago in the 1800s, and the one on the other side was today. To get a little bit more into the history of the chapel school, Conewago had a chapel school as early as 1834. Originally, it was operated by the Sisters of Charity from Emmitsburg, Maryland, but by 1851, the operation had been taken over by the Sisters of St. Joseph, who were more local. These photos both show corners of what's probably the original chapel school building on the church lawn. And this photo is also particularly useful because if you look at this versus some of the photos we'll see later, you can see how much the front lawn of the church has changed over time as well. Both of these photos show very incomplete references. They show enough that you can see that it's either brick, concrete, or stone, which is great for a geophysical survey because all of those things show up beautifully if they're below the ground surface. But by the early 1900s, the school was outgrowing that structure. It was replaced by a new school building in 1902, and this structure was demolished. So I'm going to talk a little bit about geophysical methods. This is the thing I'm most excited to talk about. This is the thing that I'm most excited about in general. I'm going to go into pretty great detail about the way that these tools work, and also to give credit where credit is due. My advisor, Dr. William Chadwick, is a geoarchaeologist with a background in archaeological geophysics, who is the one who has helped guide me not only through this project, but also it's his work and his course that brought me into this space and this specialty to begin with. And so these definitions are based on his lectures and his teachings and his practice. So to define geophysics, again borrowing his definition, geophysics is the earth science that's concerned with the physical processes and physical properties of the earth and its surrounding space environment, as well as the use of technology and quantitative methods for their analysis. For us in archaeology, archaeological geophysics is just the application of those tools to archaeological research questions. We do primarily near-surface geophysics. I'll talk a little bit more at length but just in general, the most well-known geophysical method for most of the public is probably ground-penetrating radar. Even if people don't know how it works, they've probably heard of it. If you've seen Jurassic Park, people talk about it, even though it's not really what they're doing. But magnetometry, a magnetic gradiometer survey, electrical resistivity or conductivity surveys are also very common for archaeology. For this project, I used ground-penetrating radar, GPR, and magnetic gradiometer surveys. So I'll talk a little bit more about them. And just to note, in general, in geophysics, we deal with what we call anomalies. So anything, we collect our data and we're looking for anything that isn't quite what we expected, something that's distinct from what's around it. And then we can investigate that further. First, I'm going to talk.
I'll go too far.